All right. Oh. Sorry for the last minute cancellation, but I woke up at like 7 this morning and I got up out of bed and I'm like, yeah, all right, it feels a little better today. I can handle walking on this. And then I went back to bed and then I woke up at like 8:30 and my knee hurt again, like pretty bad. So I'm like, I should not walk on this or it's going to be horrible the next few days. So anyway, apologize for that. I will make this as painless as possible. I'm going to finish up chapter 4 today, so that we can get into chapter 5 and get to another essay question was the purpose of this video and why I just didn't cancel class without a video because we do have to get to another essay question. So we pick up with this slide, which talks about status hierarchies. And so more or less, when we look at this middle childhood group, the 6 to 12-year-olds, you can see that there's certain friendship order, if you will, or social order in terms of classes and what have you. And so when we break it down, we're going to break it down like popular kids versus unpopular kids. We're going to break it down into 4 categories in the next chapter. But for the time being, we're just going to talk about kind of the status hierarchies. And so friendships, children's friendships do show clear hierarchies in terms of status. And status is the evaluation of a role or a person by other relevant members of the group. And so we'll just break it down into high status versus low status. So popular versus unpopular kids. High status kids are more likely to form friendships with other high status children, more likely to form exclusive and desirable cliques. Exclusive meaning not everybody can be in it, and desirable is kind of everybody wants to be part of it, right? They tend to play with a greater number of children and have greater access to stuff, whether it's games, toys, books, information, whatever. Low status children, so unpopular children, tend to form friendships with other low status children. They tend to play with a lower number of children than high status children, and they're more likely to play with younger or less popular children and tend to follow the lead of the high status group or the high status children. And so researchers were interested in like what makes a kid popular, right? And so they did research on it to see if there was a common thread between all the popular kids. And they did find that what they call social competence was the difference. And so social competence is the collection of social skills that enables individuals to perform successfully in social settings. And so if you're socially competent, like interacting with other people and you're good at it, then you tend to be more popular. And so some of the skills that fall under the term social competence involves helpful and cooperative. So we like helpful and cooperative people. Like if someone's helping me and if they're cooperating, I like that. And it can increase the likelihood I'm going to have friends and become high status, right? Good sense of humor. We all like to laugh. And so if a kid has a good sense of humor, that increases the likelihood of high status. Good emotional understanding. So they're not whiny, they're not aggressive, and so on and so forth. So they just have a good emotional understanding, keep their emotions in check. They do ask for help when necessary. And then in line with that, the next one says not overly rely on others. And so they're not a know-it-all, so they do ask when they need help, but they're not overly needy either. Okay, and so, hey, can you help me? Hey, can you help me? And that gets annoying and it decreases chances of friendships, let's say. They're adaptive to social situations, and so it's not kind of my way or the highway mentality. They'll adjust and adapt to the situation they're in. And they're also good at social problem solving, which is where they can basically figure out how they're good at figuring out how everybody can get along. And so they use strategies to solve social conflicts in mutually satisfactory ways. But the defining characteristic between high status, low status kids tends to be this social competence issue. There is a subset of the male population, boys, that are also popular that don't have high social competence. And these boys are aggressive, disruptive, and cause problems or troubles. And so the delinquent boys sometimes are really popular for being delinquent. And the reason behind this is because a lot of kids in this age group feel constricted by rules and feel governed, if you will, by parents and teachers and everybody else. And these kids seem to just buck the system and not be afraid and just do these things and what have you. And so the other kids are kind of idling them because of their, I don't know, bravery, I guess would be one way to put it. Um, and so there is a subset group of boys. They have low social competence. They're not all that socially competent because they're messing with stuff. Um, but they are popular because they do kind of buck the system, if you will. Unpopular children do lack that social competence. They may also be immature or inappropriately silly, and so that characteristic sometimes leads to being unpopular. They might be overly aggressive and overbearing, withdrawn or shy, and so it's not that people dislike the withdrawn or shy kids. They're just shy, so they don't have a lot of friends, so they'd be considered unpopular as well. And if they're unattractive, handicapped, obese, or slow academically, has been linked to unpopularity in childhood as well. Bullying. So, uh, turning a corner, I think. I don't know what your schooling was like. I'm assuming obviously bullying's still around, but hopefully it's not as prevalent. We're trying to curb this, and I think there's a movement to kind of deter this bullying from happening. But 160,000 U.S. children stay home from school each day because they're afraid of being bullied. So it's obviously a problem. About 10 to 15% of students bully others at one time or another. About half of the bullies do come from abusive homes. And so it's kind of their world, right? Like, they get abused, and that's kind of how they learn how to treat people. That's what's modeled for them, whether it's their parents or their siblings or what have you. And so then they go in and they treat the others the same way that they're getting treating the home. So it kind of makes sense. Cyberbullying is the use of the internet to either make fun of, start rumors, or show doctor photos of people. Oftentimes, people create anonymous accounts and bully through that account. Not any better than face-to-face bullying. Obviously, your guys' world is online, a lot of it anyway, with your social networking and so on and so forth. And so it can cause obviously deep damage that way, even though it's not face-to-face. It's not, again, the lesser of two evils. And it does do deep damage. A lot of people, I mean, you hear stories all the time of some kid that was being bullied online and that committed suicide or stuff like that. So, again, it's not a lesser of two evils. And it does cause deep damage, even though it's not face to face. Boyfriend, girlfriend, any friend? So in the 6 to 12-year-old period, we see kind of the parting of the Red Sea where almost all friendships are sex segregated. Avoidance of the opposite sex becomes pretty pronounced during middle childhood. Um, Obviously, that changes. So you go from this period, right, where they're like the first middle school dance. I do verify this usually every semester. Is it still going on? And so at the first middle school dance, right, all the girls are on one side of the gym or whatever it is, and all the boys are on the other side. Okay, and so that's what's going on here is that there is almost complete sex segregation between friends and who you're hanging out with. Um, and then by high school, so give it a few years, and then all of a sudden we have rules like no grinding at dances, right? So obviously there's some social maturation going on, let's say. And so with regards to that, they do interact. So there is crossing over between the sexes in this middle childhood period. And when they do interact, it's called border work. Generally has some type of romantic overtones, but it's not that like girls will threaten, let's say boys to, I'm going to kiss you. And then boys are like, oh, gross. And then they all start running around chasing each other, right? And boys might try and get girls to chase them and so on and so forth. And so they do interact in this period, but it's not because the girl actually wants to kiss the boy or the boy actually wants the girl to catch him in tag or whatever. But it actually re-emphasizes kind of the borders, like you guys stay over there, we stay over here, okay, and so on and so forth. And that's called border work. So they're working the borders. When we look at boys' friendships in middle childhood, so 6 to 12, boys do tend to have larger networks of friends than do girls. There's a strict dominance hierarchy. That old school film we watched about gender differences in communication, kind of talked about this dominance hierarchy where males tend to use language communication to kind of negotiate their status, right? And so in boys' friendships in particular, we do see a very strict dominance hierarchy where there's an alpha male and then there's a kind of a pecking order below that, right? And so dominance hierarchy is a rigid ranking that represents the relative social power of the members in a group. Higher status members can safely question lower status members, but if the lower status member of the group questions or confronts a higher status member, there's going to be a problem, let's say. And so if someone were to make fun of or question something about the alpha male, let's say, then the alpha male is not going to tolerate that because he's going to make sure he maintains his social order, right? And so ultimately, guys in this age group and beyond, like if you go to the calf in yeah, UJ here, you'll hear guys like, "Oh, that's nothing. When I was in high school, I did this," and so they're always trying to jockey their position in the group, right? And so, minimally, you want to maintain our social status or relative social power within the group, and if not, even maybe hopefully improve it, right? And so that's kind of what that film talked about communication in males. Girls' friendships, and so they tend to focus on one or two best friends of relatively equal status. The film drew this out as well, where they want to maintain an equal status. There isn't that dominance hierarchy where they're trying to one up each other. If there is a conflict, it's usually solved by compromising, ignoring the situation altogether, or giving in versus imposing their view. Girls can be confrontational, but generally not with their friends. Language is generally less confrontational and direct than boys. And again, they have that desire to maintain equal status relationships, so we don't necessarily see a dominance hierarchy with the female group. Now, there could be a few females who are kind of in that dominance hierarchy mindset, but generally speaking, you don't see that very often. Cross-race friendships, and so integration in and out of the classroom. Closest friendships are largely with others of the same race. That goes both ways. And so white people hang out with white people, black people hang out with black people, Hispanics hang out with Hispanics, etc. And so we do see that in this age group and beyond for that matter, that most of our closest friendships are of the same race. And the sad thing about this is that this actually increases the older we get. And so as we get older, the number of cross-race friendships actually declines. And so we become even more homogenous in our friend groups. And so there's a decline with age in the number and depth of friendships outside of our own racial group. Doesn't have to be the case, obviously. And obviously, a lot of people have friends that are of different races. But if we want to, which we do, increase cross-race friendships, it's a relatively simple equation, so to speak. If you ever seen the movie Remember the Titans, if you haven't seen this movie, you need to watch it. It's in my top three for sure. But it's about a football team that they combined schools. One was a black school, one was a white school, and they combined these two schools. And now the football team has to interact with people of different races. And it didn't go smooth right away, but in the end, I mean, it's a phenomenal film. And it basically uses this strategy to increase cross-race friendships that works really well. And the only thing that really has to happen to have cross-race friendships is that we have to interact with each other. Really. And so it's not hard, right? Like let's just get to know each other, but we have this glaring difference called skin color that is some kind of a deterrent, stupid ass deterrent that decreases the likelihood we'll interact with each other is ultimately what's happening. And so as long as we can increase the contact between these groups and talk to people that are of different races than us, we all of a sudden realize, oh, hey, oh, like, hey, you're cool. Like, let's hang out, you know? And so that's all we have to do is increase the contact between the groups. If we do this, like strategically do this to increase the number of cross-race friendships we see in this age group and beyond for that matter, it has to occur in equal status settings. And so we can't take popular black kids and put them with unpopular white kids. They don't have any commonalities. Remember, we like people like ourselves. And so if they can't find any commonalities or similar interests, let's say that it's going to decrease the likelihood. Like we wouldn't be friends with that person if they were of the same race. And so why would it work if they were different races, right? It's enhanced through cooperative activities that are important to children. In the example of Remember the Titans, football is important to kids in high school, right? And so with regards to that, it's enhanced through kind of doing something is important to them. And we obviously have to promote equality and disconfirm any negative stereotypes. And if we do that, we increase this contact between groups and we start to realize that we like each other and that we're very similar to each other and we enjoy hanging out with each other and so on and so forth. But it has to start with that contact between groups. Middle childhood, 21st century, and so increasing other changes, children experience increasing independence, and so the 6 to 12-year-old, they get to do more stuff on their own, let's say, and that's good. And so they start this process of moving from being completely controlled to controlling their own destinies or conduct. It's a period of what we call co-regulation with parents, and so the children's behavior is co-regulated. So parents and children both regulate the child's behavior. Let's say so parents generally have the rules and guidelines, but ultimately the kids now control their everyday behavior. Let's say and have to abide by those rules. And so parents still are involved, but the kids are ultimately given kind of the need, or not the need, but the process of having to control their own behavior. I got sibling relationships and sometimes rivalry, and so sometimes you might have good relationships with your siblings, and sometimes there might be some sibling rivalry. And so these relationships, obviously, with your siblings can be either positive or negative, or a little bit of both, maybe. Um, and so, with regards to sibling rivalry or strife, where there's a conflict, oil and water pair between siblings, generally speaking, if there is sibling rivalry, where there's two siblings that don't get along very well, it's usually, excuse me, it's usually the same sex siblings that are closest in age. And so let's say that the oldest kid is a female, the second born's a male, the third born's a male, and the fourth born is another female. Maybe there's four kids in that family, and that's the pattern. You do well, and research suggests that if there's going to be sibling rivalry, it's going to be those two males in the middle. They're most similar age, and they're the same sex. I'm going to show you a picture of my favorite family photo to give you the background of it. There was a little sibling rivalry at the beginning of our family. We had two kids. Lexi's my 21-year-old, Cooper's my 18-year-old. And when Brenda was pregnant with Cooper, we'd always say, Lexi, you ready to be a big sister? Yeah, I want to be a big sister or whatever. And then it happened, and she was not happy. And so my mom, Brenda was in labor with Cooper for a while. She got induced, and my mom took Lexi for the day or whatever. And so once Cooper was born, my mom brought Lexi to the hospital, and looked in there and saw that Cooper was there, and I think probably Brenda was probably holding Cooper or whatever, and she wouldn't come in the hospital room, like she would not come in there. And we're like, Lexi, don't you want to see your brother? And she's like, no, I don't. And so my mom's trying to nudge her into the room, and she's fighting to get out of there or whatever. And so finally we got her in the room, and there's a dividing curtain across or whatever, and Lexi literally wrapped herself up in the dividing curtain because she wanted nothing to do with her brother, right? And so we forced her at some point to take a family photo of Cooper's birth. And you gotta look at the look on her face, my favorite family photo. It's, she was just pissed that her brother was born. They get along great today, so it didn't last long. But sometimes you got sibling rivalry. All right. What about children who have no siblings? And so there's kind of a stereotype out there that only children are kind of spoiled little brats, if you will. And that's not necessarily the case. Only children are as well adjusted as children with brothers and sisters. And in some cases, only children are actually better adjusted, often having higher self-esteem and a stronger motivation to achieve, both of which are good. So we should have a higher self-esteem. We should feel good about ourselves. And who doesn't want a strong motivation to achieve, right? I think if you ever heard that phrase, there's always a grain of truth in a stereotype. And I think that's might be the grain of truth here, is that if you have high self-esteem and a strong motivation to achieve, I'm not just going to go with the flow, I want to do this. And that strong motivation to achieve, which you see is higher, and only children might be perceived as, oh, you're a spoiled little brat. You always have to have your way or whatever. And so it's not that's not the case, but they do have a stronger motivation to achieve, which might be misinterpreted as being a spoiled little brat, let's say. All right. If both parents work outside the home, so all of you guys are in college, so I'm assuming at some point you're trying to find a job, right? And so both parents work outside the home. How do children fare? We've talked a little bit about this when we are in the daycare chapter, and I said, rest assured, there's not a wrong decision if you're going to put your children in childcare and you're going to both work outside the home. By the sixth grade, there's no differences in these groups, right? And they've never found any stronger family cohesiveness or bond if one of the parents stays at home. And so the bigger things that we're worried about, that we might lose sleep over and trying to make this decision, they've never found those things. And secure attachment, no, we're good, and so on and so forth. So if both parents do work outside the home, the kids do fare quite well, but a few things do have to be intact. Parents should be loving and should obviously be sensitive to their children's needs. And the only time we can run into problem with childcare if we don't get them in a high quality childcare. So if their needs are not being met in childcare, then that's not good, and you might see some long-term consequences with that. So I guess it's this, right? So if you can work full time and have small kids, okay, then and still be loving, for example, and meet your children's needs, so you're not completely gassed every time you get home from work and you're like, oh, I can't deal with my kids' needs right now, and I'm not going to meet them or what have you. I'm just going to ignore them or whatever. They can cry it out. that's where we'll start to run into some problems. So if our jobs are causing a lot of stress, and so when we come home, we're always in a bad mood, and we're not very loving towards our kids because of full-time jobs, what have you. And if we can't meet their needs, then we do have issues. And so kind of keep an eye on it if you decide to work and you realize that you're constantly, in a bad mood and edgy with your kids and you're not very loving, and or if you're just so exhausted and stressed out by your job that you can neglect your children's needs. And that's probably a time where you might want to either find a new job that's not as stressful, maybe go to halftime, quit working altogether and stay at home with your kids, whatever it is. Okay. So I would probably make a different decision at that point if you're not a very loving parent, and you can't meet your children's needs. Good adjustment of the kids if both parents are working outside the home, relates to the psychological adjustment of the parents and especially the mothers. So mothers are their nurturers, right? And so as long as she's being nice to the kids, I guess we're good. And guys, we gotta love our kids as well, but in particular, the psychological adjustment of the mothers is ultimately more important, let's say, to the good adjustment of children if both parents are working outside the homes. Divorce. So about half of children in the U.S. will pass through childhood living with both parents. Each of them will only been married once, so divorce rates at about 50%. If you do get divorced, and you have younger children in particular, not super young, but in this age group, the 6 to 12-year-old group, or whatever, let's say three to 12-year-old group, kids tend to blame themselves for everything, and so they probably at some level will blame themselves for the divorce. And make sure you reiterate that to them that they have nothing to do with it. It's just that mom and dad can't get along or what have you. Now I would give you better advice of saying maybe mom and dad should learn how to get along, right? Instead of getting divorced. Um, I will have at some point the marriage sucks talk. And it doesn't suck, but it's hard, right? And so I would guess that every successfully married couple at some point, especially when they had young kids in particular, at least thought about divorce, right? And maybe even talked about having a divorce and so on and so forth. And so, but it's a process. It's not easy. It's worth it, I would say. Go working through your differences and so on and so forth. And I think I always view marriage as kind of learning how to unconditionally love. Like now you're in a partnership with this other person who's flawed, just like you are, and that's probably some of the problem. Some people don't think they're flawed, and they just look at their partner and see flaws. I can't believe you, I can't believe I married you, or what have you, and they kind of, we're kind of blindsided, so to speak, to our own inadequacies. And for every time we think that our partner's flawed, they're probably thinking the same thing about us, right? And so make sure they don't blame themselves for the divorce. For some children, there are minimal long-term damage. For many children, there's not much in terms of long-term consequences, but for some there are. After the break, both the children, and so it's not good for anybody, right? So both the parents and the children, so everybody doesn't like the divorce, and most likely everybody's going to show some types of psychological maladjustment or suffering or struggling for about 6 months to 2 years after the divorce. The most common psychological maladjustment symptoms are anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances, and phobias. Then after about 18 months to 2 years, that's when most children do return to their pre-divorce psychological adjustment. So if you have a happy-go-lucky kid that just loves life and has high energy, and then your parents get divorced, you can expect that that's probably not going to be the same for a while. But give them 18 months to 2 years, and most kids do return back to that happy-go-lucky, energetic kid. But it does take a long. It's another adjustment, right? We've been talking about adjustments in this class for a long time, and this is another adjustment. Now it's different, right? So my parents don't live together. We don't like that, obviously, and we got to make an adjustment, and then adjustments take time. And once we make adjustments, become familiar with this new system we got, then most kids do return to that pre-divorce state. That being said, twice as many children of divorced parents do require psychological counseling as do children from intact families. So it's a small percentage. So kids that need counseling, small percentage. If they're from a divorced family, double, still a pretty small percentage, but still a lot of people. So it does increase the likelihood, I guess, that some kids do need some help, some counseling help. For some children, living in a home with an unhappy marriage, and which is high in conflict, has stronger negative consequences than the divorce. And so if parents just can't get along and they're constantly at each other's throats and arguing and hating on each other and so on and so forth, that's not healthy either, right? And so, like I said, learn how to get along is number one. But if it's just not possible and you're constantly at each other's throats, the consequences of your kids watching that and watching you demonstrate this completely dysfunctional relationship is more negative than a divorce consequences would be on them. But it's not an excuse. We should just learn how not to be at each other's throats and learn how to love each other and so on and so forth. But if that's not possible, then divorce is maybe justified. Let's say that so that we're not demonstrating this horrible relationship to our children, right? Single parents, the majority of the single parent is the mother. Consequences of living in parent home depend on a few things. And so, how hard is it for kids when they're generally speaking living with their mother? All depends on a few factors. So, how hard is the divorce? Depends on how long or if the other parent lived at home. And so, if the kid is young and and they were only around their dad for 2 years, let's say the kid's 2 years old, then obviously it's not going to be as hard. If your parents get divorced when you're in high school, you're used to your dad and mom being together, and now they're just not, and it's a shock, if you will, and so that it's a little more difficult for older kids because they got used to that lifestyle with their other parent in the home. If your economic status dips into poverty, and so obviously now we have two single parents, and they each have their own bills, and there's not as much money to go around. And so if you do dip into poverty, specifically where you're having a hard time paying bills and all that stuff, then the kid, and you know what, if you can't get an iPhone because now you have a single parent, a new iPhone or a new phone or what have you, then that sucks, and I can't have nice clothes because we don't have money. That sucks. And so kids, don't adjust well if your economic status dips pretty low. Degree of stress in the household. So now you got a single parent raising you, all the kids, let's say. And that's stressful. Raising kids is stressful, and if it increases the stress in the household, or your mom or dad or whoever the parent is constantly flipping out because they can't handle it, then obviously that's not good. It's harder for the kids to deal with the divorce then. And the last one is the amount of time the parent is able to spend with the child. And so there's kind of a balance here, like a give and take. And so economic status, kids want nice clothes and everything else. And so maybe I pick up a second job, but if I pick up a second job, then I can't spend enough time with my kids, and my kids don't like it when I'm never home. And so there is kind of a give and take there, and I guess to each their own, and kind of hopefully figure out what's best for everybody. If you have to choose between one or two, I would spend time with your kids. They would appreciate that more. Maybe not when they're, maybe not when they're 10 years or 12 years old and they can't get new stuff. They're probably not going to appreciate it then, but later down the line, let's say they're in high school now, or maybe even beyond high school, let's say. If you look at the group of kids whose parents work two or three jobs and they're never around, I'm guessing there's more resentment in those kids where my mom was never around when I grew up, versus the kids who, didn't have everything back then, but their parent had one job, and so they were around a lot. Those kids would probably be much less resentful. Like they probably appreciate that mom was around or what have you, and so there'd probably be some less resentment. But if you can find that balance, obviously we're best of both worlds, and that's probably best case scenario. But blended families, it's a Brady Bunch. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Brady Bunch. I'm assuming it's still around. But two parents that have custody of their kids get married, live together, and now we have step siblings, and that's a blended family. School-age children often adjust relatively smoothly to a blended family. They kind of like it in many cases. The financial status of the family improves, and so now we have two incomes paying our bills, and so we got more money to throw around. And kids like that because now they can get the stuff they need or want. More people to share household chores with, and so you got step siblings now, and so you have to do the dish. You used to have to do the dishes every day. Now it's only, maybe every other day or every third day or every other week or however the system works. There's more social interaction and attention, so you got more siblings now, and so there's more stuff to do, and that's usually a positive thing. Not all kids react well to blended families, and specifically if any of those relationships are threatening. So hopefully get along with a step parent. Okay, that's a big one. Obviously, if you don't like your step parent, then that's not going to go well. Or if there's a step sibling you don't like, then that kind of muddies the waters as well. So as long as the relationships are good, children adjust really well to blended families. Last thing we'll talk about today is families with gay and lesbian parents. And so between 1 and 5 million US families are headed by two lesbian or two gay parents. And so researchers were interested in the development of kids who were being raised by gay or lesbian parents. And what they essentially found was there was no negative consequences associated with having gay or lesbian parents, except for one. There is one, and I'll cover that at the end. But kids from gay and lesbian headed families develop similarly to children of heterosexual families. Their sexual orientations unrelated to their parents. They have no more or less gender typed behavior. They seem equally well adjusted, have similar relationships with their peers and adults, and their romantic relationships and sexual behaviors are no different from those adolescents living with opposite sex parents. The only negative consequence, which is unfortunate because they have nothing to do with this, is that if their peers know their parents are gay or lesbian, There's obviously kids that will tease and pick on them about that, or and that's a negative consequence of having gay or lesbian parents. And it's unfortunate because they obviously can do nothing about it, and they do have to sometimes deal with those issues. But other than that, kids with gay or lesbian parents seem to be no different than kids with heterosexual parents. All right, you guys have a good day. I will see you on Friday.